It's a new day, and it's finally time to talk about a project that it kind of dropped off the face of the planet as far as my channel went, and that project is Cinderella's maid dress, work dress, whatever you want to call it. It's the main dress that she wears in the 2015 Cinderella, but now it's time to finally figure that difficult step out. And that difficult step is the design/printing process of getting the flowers on the fabric. It's just kind of a hard thing to tackle because there's a lot of ideas around how you can get those flowers onto the skirt of this dress, but no matter the method that we end up using to do this, it's going to be a long, tedious process to get it all on. There's 8 repeats of the long, big flower pattern around the skirt, and then there's all the little prints in between. Now, the thing that makes this extra challenging is the fact that there's regular coral, dark coral, light coral, and a green. So there's 4 colors in the design. And with pretty much anything, the more colors, the more steps you're gonna have to do to achieve that design. I'm pretty sure I'm going to screen print my design on this fabric. But before I go down that route, I wanna test out a few other methods, but then also, before I do any of this, I need to create a design of the flowers that I can work with. Because right now, all I have design-wise is just seeing the flowers on the skirt. And I need to take those photos of the design and turn it into something that I can either print out or create screen printing screens with, or whatever the case may be. So the method for creating this design is going to use the app called Procreate on an iPad. We want to get the flower design that you see on the dress into a PNG vector type file. Because from there, you'll either be able to print up the design, or if you're gonna embroider it, which I won't be, but something like that, you would need to start with a PNG photo that's clear with where you want it stitched, or printing it up, so you can print up one color over the other color. Whatever the case may be, you need something that's very clear as far as this is this color, this is the shape, and all that. A photo is just not gonna do for this. Unless you're freehanding it, then maybe you could do it that way. Basically, my method of doing that, bring in the pictures that we have that clearly show the flower design. And that is honestly really hard because you've got the movement of the skirt going on. So there's a couple photos that you can see the design, but because with how the skirt folds and stuff, you only see half of it, or it's kind of bent, so it's bent out of shape. So I'm using a combination of a couple different photos that show a couple different angles. I'm gonna combine them so that I get a pretty flat view of what's happening in the flower design. There's one photo in particular that is incredibly helpful for this process, and I can't remember her name, but she took these incredibly high quality photos of the dress on display, but her pictures that she took are the highest quality of details that I have ever seen, so incredibly helpful, but especially for this design. And that gives you a great picture of the arrangement of color that's going on in the design. From the lower flower, that's very clearly seen. The next one up is partly seen, and then pretty much from there we get hardly any in detail look of what shape each color is creating. So I'm just gonna do my best on this lower flower, and then from there, moving up the flower design, I'm going to use the blurry photo that shows it flat as best I can, and then just kind of create the same shapes that I saw in that lower flower. So the lower flower just gives you a good idea of the style that the design is making, and then I'm just kind of copying that style as I go up the tier of flowers. Just a quick interruption of this video to enjoy this beautiful spring weather, and also a thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. So with spring, I think there's just a certain something in the air that makes you want to learn more or try new things and just get out there and do the things that you've been postponing. At least that's for me, and if that's also your case, I highly recommend looking into Skillshare. They have thousands of classes to choose from in so many different topics. You can just dive into learning or honing existing skills by using and watching those classes. A class that caught my eye recently is Painting with Watercolors, From Inspiration to Fashion Illustration by Katie Rogers. And I am always wanting to learn more about how to draw and just especially clothing and all that. But whatever yours may be, Skillshare has an offer for you all. The first 1,000 of my viewers to use the code BellaMazeDesigns or click the link in my description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so you can start exploring your creativity today. So something important to keep in mind with the app Procreate, and really just anything when creating a design like this, is to remember to create layers, which is something I forgot partly along the way in tracing this design. I want to be able to separate the different colors and also each individual flower to rearrange position and stuff. And if it's all in the same layer, you won't be able to do that. So just remember to create multiple layers when you're tracing something, drawing something. It'll just save a bunch of headache later on. Now you can also do this whole process on something like Illustrator, or you could print up the photo and then like Sharpie over it or something. This process can be done with any project that you're wanting to copy a design. This is basically the same process that I used when I replicated embroidery for the bottom of the skirt, and I was trying to turn it into embroidery pattern. But the main step in getting to the embroidery pattern was tracing the design. And I did the physical way of doing it. I printed out the photos and then I see there's the word again, Sharpied the outlines. From there, I scanned it into the computer. So it kind of was a complicated process of doing the same thing that I'm doing right now, but because I didn't have a fancy iPad or an app or anything, I just went the old school method. But yeah, this is just saving a little bit of a step because as right when I'm drawing this outline, it is turning into a vector. You know, this is one of my favorite parts about a project. There's something about the details, like just trying to get the details as accurate as possible. That's definitely my perfectionism part of my personality coming through. Not that you have to do them in order to do a project, but that is my favorite part. And I think a lot of people try not to do the perfectionist part of the personality or capitalize on that part because there is a lot of, well, if it's not done right, you kind of get disappointed or whatever. And there are times that happens to me, but I've realized over the years that the perfection part of my sewing is really the part where I enjoy it the most. And there's a balance between embracing that perfectionism and getting the details right, but then also once you've done what you've done, be happy with the result. So I think there's this kind of weird balance between pursuing those details and figuring that out and doing it as well as possible, but then once you've decided what to do and have done it and have done your best at it, then be happy with the result, even though the perfectionist part is going like, yeah, but that part isn't right, that part isn't right. So there's this balance, and I'm still learning that, but that if you have that same part in your personality or in your sewing, just to find that balance, that you can enjoy those details and enjoy that part of your personality in your sewing by finding the fun details and enjoying that part, just having fun finding all the little nuggets of detail that you can add to your project. But then once you've made it, be happy with the result and be proud of yourself. So yeah, just thoughts. Anyway, this is a fun part of creating costumes and doing it, and so I'm going to enjoy this part. And also, I keep forgetting to mention this, but I am going to have this design for sale so that you don't have to do all this detail. If you enjoy it, then I would recommend doing it just because it's fun. But if you don't want to go down that path of trying to figure out this design out in particular, you can find the links for this design up above. With PNGs, you can do a lot. So I will probably be doing screen printing, and I will walk through the process of how to create your own screens and such. But you can also use this as, say, if you want to freehand it, you can use it as a reference, or there's a couple other methods that we're gonna explore in this video about how you can turn these PNGs into something that you can put on fabric. All right, I think that could be called good. The next step is to turn this, well, print it up and figure out the right size for the design. That's a main part before I start splitting up all the layers. So I'm just gonna print that up and then kind of play around with it and see what happens. All right, we've cut out the new size, quite a bit smaller, but a good indication of the size is this top little part. It should be about the same size as the repeat pattern. So this first one was obviously way too big with its little flower of that size. So, put this back on. This one's looking a little bit small. Yep, it's a little bit small, but I think I'll just enlarge it about 2 inches, 1.5 inches, and then we should be good. Before I do everything finally, I will double check that size change. But so far, it looks pretty good. I'm going based on proportions of the skirt. The design, the top of the design is a little bit more than half of the skirt, and right now the one I have printed up is more like a little less than a half. That's very scientific, isn't it? And then we do have the repeats that I've got printed up about the right size spacing, and they do look pretty correct in the spacing, and end up making these just a tad bigger. So before we can really go on to testing some of the methods for getting the color on the fabric, we've got to figure out a good color for that paint. And I've chosen to use these. So this paint is a very thick paint. It's meant for screen printing, and with screen printing, you want a thick ink. But on the same side, I don't want my paint, my printed design, to be too thick and rigid once it's on the fabric and dried. So I'm gonna be watering it down a little bit thinner than usual. Just want it to be really soft, and we'll just see if we can make that work. So far, the red and yellow and white is looking pretty good. Just gonna add a little bit of water into this. I'm thinking that color right there is going to be the dark coral, so I'm just gonna go ahead and add more white to this batch. Now for the really light, barely pink, I'm just gonna add white and then just a little bit of this already mixed up color. There we have it. This is very easy to get, I think, the right shade of coral. I feel like this one needs to be just a tad lighter, and maybe this one's a little bit too dark. Okay, now we're gonna go on to the green. So the first method we're going to test out for printing designs onto fabric is basically creating a stencil that we can then use to paint the design on it. Now, it is not number one as in the best method you could do. It is just the order of how I'm showing these methods. So I am going to create a stencil using my old Cricut machine. It's like 12 years old. It's my mom's, and I have no idea if it will actually work for this purpose because I need to create a custom design on my computer and then somehow get this old machine to cut it out. Right now, you need cartridges to run the thing. I don't know if we're gonna be able to do this, but I have a little bit of hope because my brother at one point cut some stuff custom on this machine. So I know there's a way. So first of all, I need this cord. That is the only spot on this machine where you can plug something else in. And then of course, because computers don't have USB anymore, we've got to put an adapter on. So the first step in this process was to create a Cricut file, and that I used Cricut Design Space. So here you can see I'm just dragging in the different PNGs, and then using their program, arranged them to about the right size. After I got them to the right size, I changed the color so I could see what was going on. But from there, we need to connect a machine. So it's not coming up. I don't think it's really gonna work. I'll be right back. So as it turns out, there is no software capable of using my Cricut machine or my mom's old Cricut machine. So this was a Cricut Expression, and as of 2018, Cricut got rid of their software, which made it compatible to use that machine. They upgraded to a different program. So their new software is capable with the Explorer and Maker series. So if you happen to own one of those Cricut machines, you can use that process that I just showed you of bringing it into that file and cutting it out on your Cricut machine. Unfortunately for me, I don't have one, and I am not going to go out and buy one. I am not going to use this method, but I still want to test it out. So I am going to go the old school method. This might take a while, a lot longer than hitting a button on a Cricut machine. Also, another thing to note, apparently there were several third-party softwares that you could use your Expression on or with, but those two are no longer compatible with this machine. So, oh well, if you have one of those machines, good for you, use it and enjoy it for me. I'm gonna use this, that'll be fun. All right, I am finished, and it took a lot quicker than I thought it would take. It took maybe 2 hours, less than 2 hours. So that is all of them together. And then if we separate them, here's the green, and then, no, this is green, that one's cream. And then we've got the main one, and then the dark coral. So they are definitely not as fine as I would want them to be if these were actually going to be used on the final project. And one, I would not be cutting them myself if I were using these for real on the real dress, because there's a lot of flowers. This just would not happen. These will give me a great starting point to test that method of using a stencil to print on the different colors. So I'm using a foam brush because, like, brushing it like that, I can tell it's slightly moving the stencil out of place. So I'm just using a dabbing motion, and that seems to be working pretty well. So the results of this stencil with just a little bit of water added to the paint is overall pretty good, though the paint definitely added some stiffness to the fabric, not in the best way. So I definitely want to test adding more water to the paint to see if I can get a softer feel. Also, the green is pretty weird color, and overall it's a little bit too dark, all the colors, so I'll be lightening that up as well. In order to test the screen printing, we first got to create some screens. I will go over the entire process of how to do screen printing in a tutorial video once I make the actual screens. But real quick, to understand screen printing, you have a frame with mesh fabric on it. So there's a bunch of tiny little holes, very fine, and you fill in the holes using photo emulsion, which just blocks all the holes. And this sets with sunlight. You can get a special bulb that sets it, or I do it in the sun because it's just easier. But you still want to do it in a fairly dark environment. You don't want it to set yet. So you don't want it to be exposed and set in the screen. Because when you go to expose it and set it, you print up your design in a clear plastic sheet. It actually prints in like a laser printer in black ink. You put that design on top of the emulsion, you go expose it in the sun, and what that does is it sets all the emulsion except for under your black ink design that you have on top. And then you go and you rinse the screen off, and the part that didn't get set, which is your design, washes away and everything else stays. And so now you have a screen with your design in it that you can rub the ink over, and the ink goes through the whole parts and not the rest of the parts because of the emulsion. All right, so we have screens made for all 4 colors. So we are going to start, and I've mixed up my paint here. I've made them a bit more watery than the other time to see if it gives a better drape to the fabric. Right now, the paint stiffens the fabric quite a lot. Now we need to let that dry, and then we'll go on to the next color. I've just finished screen printing all 4 colors. I am so excited with how it's turned out. Also, I realized after I made up my screens that I printed them up too small compared to how big I was printing it up. I forgot to scale it when I was printing it. So this paint was with more water added to it, and it's got a great feel compared to this one with less water. It just has a much better drape to it. And I'm just really happy with how the design came out with the screen print. It's really nice and crisp. Also, the colors, I got a lot better on the colors on this one. I'm pretty happy with them. The green's still a little bit off, maybe too vibrant, but it's much better than that one and pretty good. But I'm gonna try some more water in the paint just to see if I can get it even softer with the fabric. This one had quite a bit of water added to it, and you can tell that the vibrancy of the design is a little bit less because there's just more water and less paint. And then this one was just with a little more water than the first one. So overall, this one definitely has more structure to it, the paint does. This one has a pretty good structure. It's not too crisp. And then this one I would say has about the same as this one. But with this one, with quite a bit of water, I actually got some bleeding going on into the fibers just because the water, the tinted water was leaking out of the paint basically. So this one was a pretty good consistency. It was just like slightly watery, not drippy is the best way to describe how I got that. And then I did the stencil in less water also, but we still got some structure going on with the paint. And that's because when I do the stencil method, it just tends to let more paint into the fabric as you're trying to get the stencil all filled out. Whereas with screen printing, you slide the paint across and it's just getting a nice even layer across the whole thing. Whereas the stencil, you just can't quite get that. Also, something I did with the screen print ones, I threw these in some water and just let it soak for a bit to see if that would help soften up the paint, and it definitely did. So right now I have very little structure with the paint, just because it was thinned with water, and also I washed the whole fabric and that helped. But there is actually a second method that you can do to get something on fabric that doesn't add any thickener, and that is using dyes. So you can basically just get any fabric dye and use it to screen print or paint on your design. Now the problem with that is, of course, dye is liquid and watery and everything, and so that is where sodium alginate comes into play. So it is made of seaweed and it can actually thicken food as well as dyes and paints, but it's something that I just recently discovered that can thicken up dyes for you so that you can screen print with it and have some body like a paint usually does. But it doesn't add any thickness to the design that you're painting on. I am going to mix up about 3/4 of a teaspoon to 1 cup of water. And you let it sit for at least an hour after adding the seaweed to the water, and that is when it thickens up and everything. So I'm gonna start off doing that. All right, this has been about an hour of this soaking, and it is definitely got very thick and globby. And so now I'm just going to test out adding dye to it and hopefully creating a thick enough dye substance and the right color to then go and screen print this stuff. We'll see if that works. But because we're dealing with dry powdered dye, wear protective measures. I do apologize for all my other dyeing videos where I'm not wearing masks and gloves. So wear them, and we're just gonna get going and see what happens. Just gonna start with the main coral color. I don't know how dark this is all gonna be, so I'm just gonna start with a very small amount. I'm first mixing it with just a bit of water to dissolve it, and then I'll add the thick stuff. So far, this thickening stuff is very nice. Look at. Now I just have to see what kind of color we're working with here. Right there is the color I just achieved, which is very similar to the dark color, which means I'm just gonna leave it as the dark color and now create a lighter version of that, which means I'm just gonna add less dye and maybe a little bit of ivory. See if that does anything. All right, there's that one. A little bit lighter and a pretty nice color. So far it's looking a little more coral, these dyes, than my paints, which I'm kind of liking the idea of. I'm now just gonna mix up a little bit of ivory for the light color. There's just straight ivory. I'm gonna add a little bit of coral pink to that because it's too yellowy ivory. And now I'm just gonna move on to the green. I got the dye Lime Squeeze. So even with how dark that little dye pot is, that's what the color comes out as. So that's really interesting. All right, so now that we've created a pretty good substance with this seaweed and dye, I'm now gonna see how it screen prints, and I'm also gonna see how it does with stencils. So let's do that. And here's the result of the dyeing. So with dyeing, you do have to set the dye like you would when you're dyeing fabric. And so I just, after this printing got dried, those areas, I just plunked these in some water with soda ash fixer, let them soak there for about 20 minutes, rinsed them out. And in that process, it not only rinsed out the seaweed thickener from the fabric, but it also set the dye. So I was a little worried that maybe when you did that in the water, like this color dye would like seep into the fabric, and it really didn't. Right now it's kind of hard to tell because I definitely didn't add enough dye to the whole mixture, just so it wasn't quite strong enough to dye the fibers the colors that I wanted to. And so I actually did another test with more dye in the mixture, and this is the result. It is really, really good. The main coral color is a little bit dark, but here's just a comparison between paint and dye, and you can see that I got a really similar color, but there's no structure of paint on the fabric with the dye. Whereas this one, you can feel that paint structure, and the dye you can't at all because the seaweed thickener washes away and it's just dyed the fibers. So these were my first batches, definitely too light. I added more, and this is the result. So I'll be lightening up the main coral just a little bit, but this seems to be really the best option. It's added zero texture to the piece of fabric, and it's got a great crisp outline. An option I just quickly did was hand painting. I just printed up the different colors on paper and then put the fabric on top of it, and then I could see what I was doing, and I did that with each of the colors. So here's the result. Overall, it wasn't too hard to do that hand painting. It just took quite a bit longer than the stencil or screen printing method. And also it's just not as crisp, and it's a little more watercolory looking, kind of more blended together. So if you like that look, hand painting is definitely an option, or if you just like the process of hand painting something, this would definitely be an option. So there you have it. I have finally took the leap, took the jump, and tested out different methods for getting this design on a fabric, and I'm pretty sure I have achieved a result that will look so good. I am so excited to go and do it on the real fabric and do that full scale, full size, and hopefully it works and looks good. So for Ella's work dress, to get the flowers on the fabric, I am going to screen print it using dye, and I will have a full tutorial about how to do this entire process step by step coming to you all very shortly. And as I mentioned earlier, I have the downloads available of my flower design that I am calling my flower design because like 70% of it was my own kind of putting spots here and there. So anyway, thank you all for joining and watching. And as always, a huge thank you to my patrons for their continual support in all this. I am so happy to have a project to share with them along the process. So as always, thank you. And until next video, go out there and learn, create, and inspire.